Hi, my name is Mazzanti, and I am a 2:25 marathon runner. And last weekend, I won the Richmond Marathon. Last Saturday, I finished first place at the Richmond Marathon in 2 hours, 25 minutes, and 12 seconds, just over 5:30 minute per mile pace. And if you have been watching along my journey and the last few videos kind of leading up into this race, following my build, thank you. I really appreciate all the support so far, and it's been great connecting with a lot of you. And I had a chance to meet a few people during the race as well, and then also just had a ton of support from friends and family and followers, others in the Richmond running community, and I think just beyond Richmond as well. So thank you for your support. If you're new to the channel, thanks for tuning in. Today I want to go over a few different things. I'll briefly talk about some of my lead up into the race, what kind of allowed me to run well and finish first place at Richmond. But really my focus here is talking about the race itself. I'll go through my strategy and how I approached Richmond. It allowed me to, I think, run a really good race and hit a PR. And then it's been a few days since the race, so I've had a little time to process, and I'll just talk about some of my feelings now, kind of where I'm at, maybe some of my next plans going forward, and how, from both the recovery standpoint, but also maybe kind of where I see my running career, my running, I don't know for sure it's a career just yet, but my running journey, where that might go, and at least in the short term. So this might be a little on the longer side. I'll try to keep things interesting. I designed a 12-week training program to help me prepare for the Richmond Marathon. It wasn't like this at the beginning when I started training though. Following the summer, where I had about a 6 to 8 week training block that was focused on speed, where I raced a 5K at the end of that, I transitioned into marathon specific training. At that time, my goal was actually to run a different race entirely, the Wineglass Marathon in upstate New York. And I designed a 8-week training program to kind of help me build on my fitness from the summer, and then just transition to more of a long distance type of training to be able to run well at that marathon. My training was going well. I was hitting the workouts as planned, and I was increasing volume. So I think everything was going overall quite well, but my fitness still wasn't where I thought it would be, or where I was hoping it would be at that point. So a few weeks out from the marathon, I started to consider other alternatives. And just kind of thinking back on my running progression over the last few years, Richmond came to the top of that list pretty quickly. I started training for the marathon distance in the summer of 2022, and debuted at Richmond for my first marathon, where I ran a 2:47 and had a really good experience. It was a tough day. In 2022, the weather was really warm, it was hot and humid, but I still went out, had a great race, and ran a great time. When I started that build, my goal was just to finish the marathon. And then as I was training, I started to add in these different goals, and ultimately kind of settle on breaking 3 as my first in my first marathon as my goal, which I was able to do by a pretty big margin. So thinking back, I've had a lot of success over the last 2.5 years in different races, in my training, and I just thought it would be just this great moment for me to be able to come back to Richmond, race, and hopefully finish on the podium and with the top 3 finish, and really just kind of this full circle moment. As I was training, I did a few different things I think that really helped me perform well. One was doing 1 or 2 speed sessions per week, really kind of as much as my body would allow. I left some room for flexibility, where I was able to add a little bit more or take one off the schedule. My body was sore, was trying to recover. And then I would also do a long run on the weekends, somewhere between 18 and 26 miles. And then I would fill in the rest of that on the other days with just high volume, running anywhere between 100 and 120 miles a week, just so my legs, my body were prepared for the demands of racing 26 miles at near maximum effort. But training was going well, and I wasn't sure in the beginning exactly what kind of pace I was going to run. I had this kind of lofty goal at that time of maybe making the podium, but I wasn't quite sure what my pace would be. Instead of putting a time limit on there and trying to hit those times, I approached workouts and long runs by trying to run at the right effort, running as fast as I could for whatever that prescribed workout was or for that amount of time. And by doing that, that allowed my body to really, I think, improve as much as it could in that time without leaving anything on the table or without pushing too hard and ending up injured. And I think in my case specifically, I definitely fall in the category of maybe doing too much rather than too little. So, I think having some type of guidelines and having some type of plan really helped me manage my effort and make sure that I wasn't doing too much. And then at that point, which would be really frustrating, but you do all that work and then not even be able to start the race. So definitely wanted to avoid that. And although there definitely got close to that, in the last few weeks leading up to Richmond, I was able to stay mostly injury-free, and then on race day, I had no lingering issues or nothing really that inhibited my performance. So from that perspective, that was very much a success. But as I was training, and again, kind of going back to how I kind of dialed in my target race pace, I started looking at where my paces were starting to fall within the right effort, especially as we got about a month out from the training, and started to realize that marathon pace was probably going to be somewhere around a 5:30 minute per mile pace. And looking back at Richmond's historical results, I realized that put me in kind of the right range of where athletes were in the podium. And although I never knew, or I couldn't predict who was going to show up, there are a lot of great runners, and I ran a fast time, but I am by no means a professional runner. I'm just someone who I think is athletic and works hard and has had some success. But if someone were to show up that was just much faster, unfortunately, there's not much I could have done. But I did feel comfortable with my ability to push hard and run fast, and that was good enough, I felt like, to be able to at least make the podium. In the back of my mind, I was definitely hoping for a win. It was something I was, maybe dreaming about quietly, but also working really hard to try to make that as much of a realistic possibility as I could. If you've been following along in any of my previous videos, you may have picked up on the fact that I, had some potential injury risk going into the marathon. My left Achilles was actually really giving me some trouble the last 2 to 3 weeks heading into Richmond. And I think it was a combination of a few things. Like I mentioned before, I had the tendency to push a little too hard or extend some of my workouts or sessions longer than maybe I should. And it's hard when you're caught up in the moment and you're having a good workout to pull back, and it's definitely something that I probably need to work on improving going forward. But regardless, that's probably a video for another day. But here anyway, so I had some potential Achilles pain, and I think, looking back, I can probably pinpoint that to more specifically maybe some of the races that I did as practice leading up into this. I ran several different races, including, I guess if we go all the way back to the beginning of the build, where I ran a 5K race in Ashland and set a new PB in 15 minutes and 20 seconds and finished first place there. I ran the DC half and set a PB there, 109.59, breaking the 70-minute mark for the first time. And that was probably the first race that started to indicate that my fitness was really improving. I ran the DC half last year in 2023 and ran that in 1:14 and I think maybe 30 seconds, so about 5 minutes faster than that in just 12 months. So that was really encouraging and really kind of lit a fire in my training to continue to work hard, knowing what might be possible in just a short amount of time. But after the DC half, I also ran the Virginia 10 miler. I was part of the international elite field and finished in the top 25 on a really difficult course. That course has had a ton of elevation, and then also just some really high-level runners, including Olympians. So that was a really special moment to be part of that group of runners, even though we're well ahead of where I was and didn't see them after the first few hundred meters of the race. But after the Virginia 10 miler, I also ran the Emerald Isle Marathon, which I did as a training run and finished first place and set a course record there in 2 hours and 39 minutes. And then the week after that, I ran the City of Oaks Half Marathon, where I also set another PB, where I ran a 109.48, so about 10 seconds faster than DC, which doesn't seem like very much, but the course in DC is really flat, and the City of Oaks Half has over 600 feet of elevation, so it was a much more difficult course. So the fact that I was able to run faster on a more difficult course was also really encouraging. And then, and maybe just a little more on that piece, the City of Oaks Half was a very intentional race that I picked, knowing that I was going to run Richmond, where, Richmond is not a fast course. There's 700 feet of elevation, and it really requires a strategic approach to be able to run your best. So I wanted to make sure that I was not just comfortable running on flat ground, because that's challenging in itself, but it's a different type of running. So, the City of Oaks allowed me to test my ability to push hard up the hills, to be able to open my stride, maybe gain some time when I'm going downhill, and then also to see if my legs are strong enough to handle that kind of work over the course of, for the half, for 13 miles. So ran a great time there. I won that race by, I think, 7-minute margin. So that was a really good race, and again, gave me a lot of confidence going into Richmond. But following the Emerald Isle Marathon and the City of Oaks Half, I started to develop a lot of tightness in my left calf. And, let's say 2 weeks out from the race, it actually got pretty bad, where I would start the run, and I really wasn't able to run with a full motion because there was just so much tightness in that left Achilles. And I think the only thing that allowed me to keep going, or to be able to hold on to just to kind of maintain an optimistic perspective, was that as I would run, let's say 3-4 miles into that run, it would start to loosen up and feel a little bit better. So where I might start the run with a pain on maybe let's say a 6 or 7 scale out of 10, I might finish at a 3 or 4. So I didn't think it was so serious yet, or a serious of an injury where it was going to sideline me completely, but it was something I had to pay attention to and monitor to make sure that it wasn't getting worse. So, really the last 2 weeks leading up into the race was about me dialing back my training, which I was doing anyway with a taper, reducing my mileage by about 20% each week, going from 120 miles down to 100, and then just under 80 the week before and week of, including the marathon. In addition to that, decrease in total volume, I usually like to keep workouts during that period. But in this case, I just removed the workouts the week before, did a few strides, which just, maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds at most, where I would increase the speed, but I tried to keep that relatively low just so I wasn't increasing the load or potential, for an injury risk, in the days leading up to it. It's harder to build fitness that's going to materialize in time for the race, so it's easy to do more harm than good. So with that in mind, I decided to back off, remove the workouts, and just really just kind of rely on everything that I've done, all the workouts, all the training, and have confidence that that was going to help me run a fast time in Richmond. The marathon can be really intimidating, and I think if you look at the race as a whole, thinking about just 26.2 miles, the elevation profile, the wind, and all these challenges, it's really easy to be overwhelmed by the task at hand. So one of the things I wanted to do going into Richmond was design a very specific race strategy that allowed me to break the marathon into a few different parts specific to the course, that allowed me to be able to perform well, be able to kind of regulate the amount of effort that I was using. That way I was able to kind of get the most out of my fitness on race day. So that ultimately kind of developed into this 3-pronged strategy of flow, fight, and finish. And each one was a little bit different. So the beginning of a race, there's just so much excitement. I got to Richmond and there were just so many people there. There were a lot of crowds. I started doing a few strides up and down right in front of the starting line, and I could just feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins at that point. I was so excited, really confident that I could run fast, and just started, thinking about all the possibilities. And then just, it's just race day. It's just really fun. It's something I've been thinking about and working towards for, the last 3 months, and race day was finally here. So, part of it was just to kind of really regulate, kind of calm my emotions and find a nice relaxed state. So in that first section, it was miles from the beginning of the race, so mile 1 to about 9.5. And that part of Richmond's course, there is some hills, but it's really kind of rolling. There's nothing too difficult or overwhelmingly challenging, right? So my goal here was just to find a steady pace, somewhere around a 5:30. I gave myself about a 20 to 30 second range on my pace, on either side of that. If I was feeling good, I'd allow myself to go a little bit faster. If it was challenging, I would let it go a little slower. So instead of being tied to a really strict pace, I was running more by effort and by feel. Knowing that over the course of 26 miles, if you give yourself a little wiggle room, you actually run better, because you won't be pushing when you're tired and actually exhaust some energy a little bit too soon or elevate your heart rate, for example. So again, the beginning of the race was really about me just finding this nice relaxed state, finding comfort in running my target pace right around that 5:30 pace, and really just kind of enjoying the moment as much as I could. I did have a bit of a game time decision though. When I was standing on the start line, I was talking to a friend, and I started just to think about who might be willing to go with me, what the competition looked like during the race. So I actually decided when the gun went off to push harder than race pace. So actually drop it down by about 15 to 20 seconds, run closer to actually what my half marathon pace is. And my goal was to do that for about 800 meters or half a mile to see if anyone was willing to match my pace and go with me. And by doing that, I'd be able to really accomplish a few different things. One, see if anyone was willing to push hard, and I would know very clearly, very, very early on, how competitive a race it was going to be, who was going to challenge me. And then the other part of that was to create a little bit of space between me and the rest of the field. So I wanted to signal that I was going to be the one to set the pace, that I was out there not only to run fast, but to compete for a podium spot and really as close to first as I could. But after going out, I was after 800 meters or so, I didn't see anyone on either side of me, so I didn't know, if anyone was following. But I was listening to the sound of the crowds cheering for me, and then how long it would take for the crowd to cheer for the next runner or group of runners behind me. And in the beginning, it was all more or less around the same time because we were bunched together. But it didn't take long. A quarter mile, half mile in, there was already some separation between me and the next group. And over time, over those next few miles, I could just hear that amount of time increasing, letting me know that the gap between me and the next group was only getting bigger. So I was able to establish an early lead and then maintain that. And I didn't have to push too hard. I settled into a comfortable pace right around that 5:30. The first few miles were a little bit quicker, but again, still within the right range. And again, it was a lot of fun. I was running through downtown Richmond, coming through the Libby Grove area, the west side of Richmond, the west end of Richmond. And I was running through a lot of familiar neighborhoods. That's actually the part of the city where I live. So I ran right by my house, my neighbor, and I got to see a lot of just friendly faces. I heard a lot of people cheering for me, and it was just and it's an area where I've run so many miles. So it was a really familiar part of the course, and a lot of fun. It was a great way to get settled in, having that familiarity on the course, so early on. Once I got to mile 9, I knew that I would be switching from the first phase of the race to the second phase, the fight phase. And that really marked the most challenging part of the course itself, where there were 2 pretty significant sections of the course with steady and even maybe, let's say, pretty sharp inclines. So I'd have to battle some elevation as well as some headwind. And knowing that, one, mentally I was expecting it, I wasn't surprised by it, so I knew I was going to have to work a little bit harder. I allowed my pace to back off just a little bit. So I was running more at a very similar, maybe slightly elevated effort level, but again, just the pace dropped just slightly there. So from between miles 9.5 to around mile 12, I climbed close to, I think it was maybe 200, 250 feet of elevation. But again, focused on keeping my heart rate in the right place, running by effort. And then there was about a 3-mile segment where it flattened out, maybe even a slight decrease in elevation. But there was still some headwind and crosswind there. So, at that point I wanted to push a little bit faster, but I also knew I had a 3-mile segment after that was going to be back uphill and into headwind. So rather than push, I just held steady, really focused on trying to let my heart rate stabilize, and then just prepare for the work that was ahead. And that was the right choice. When I started to get around to the 14th Street Bridge, that marked the last portion of that segment, of this fight segment, where it was it's a gradual incline over that bridge, but it's also completely exposed, right? So at that point, there's probably close to 10, maybe 12 mile an hour headwind. So, in addition to some, to the increase in elevation, you're running uphill, but also directly into the wind. It starts to take a lot more effort to maintain your pace. I actually felt pretty good going up the bridge, and I was expecting to feel a lot worse. Maybe just in years past, I was struggling more. My fitness wasn't where it was this year, and I remember that actually hurting a lot more. But it did catch up to me. Once I finished the bridge, you start to run through the fan heading west, and maybe I just took for granted the amount of elevation that was there, but that was another 100, 150 feet of elevation over those next 2 miles. And it was challenging. I think that those 3 miles, the bridge and then the 2 miles actually following were the slowest miles of my race. You have already a little fatigue building up. You're getting to a point in the race where you've been on the course for an hour and a half or 2 hours or more. And then you're just having to fight this continuous increase in elevation. So really important just to keep your head down, work hard, but really finding the right effort level, right? If you're going a little bit too slow, you're leaving time on the table, but if you push too hard, you might go a little bit faster in the moment, but that will catch up to you, a few miles later when you're, in mile 23, 24 or later, and you end up starting to blow up and you start to run really slow. So, I found a good range, what felt comfortable, and I was able just to maintain that through those miles. Once I left the fan, I headed north. I turned onto Arthur Ashe Boulevard, and this part of the race, I was really excited because I knew once I made that turn that I was kind of heading out of the fight phase and onto the third part, which was finish, and that really kind of signified, the transition from that I've conquered the difficult part of the course, and it really became kind of a mental battle. It's still physical because I had to maintain the pace, and I had another 8 miles to run at that point, so it was far from being finished. But it was more about just maintaining what I had already done, knowing that the course itself wasn't going to present too many more challenges. But what I didn't account for maybe enough or really take into consideration, and I knew that there would be headwind, but I was running almost directly into the wind, and it was more open than I was expecting or anticipating, and those miles were actually really difficult. And I think what made it worse was I also just expected that point for it to be a little bit easier. So now I'm running in, I remember pushing off to accelerate and not speeding up. And I didn't panic, but I definitely was a little bit worried. So I started checking my body. I'm like, do I have any injuries at this point? Does something feel off? Is there something wrong with my stride? But my breathing was in check. I wasn't gasping for air. I felt comfortable. I was working hard, but still very much under control. Nothing hurt. My legs felt fine. I didn't have any excessive fatigue. Everything was kind of right where I expected to be when you're, 18 miles into the race. So, I just said, hey, and that's when I kind of realized, all right, there is more headwind here. There is more wind, and I know what it's going to be like. I knew that there was a turnaround in a few miles, in about 3 miles. So I knew if I could make it to that point, then I would have a bit of relief from the wind and the elements. So I put my head down, but mentally that was probably the most challenging part of the course. And it took a lot of grit to be able to fight through that, stay positive, and I think, this point, there was also a lot of the crowd, really, and I haven't mentioned this up to this point, but, there's such great crowd support throughout the course in Richmond, and this part of the course was really nice as well. It definitely helped me, motivate me, and you always get a surge of adrenaline as you're running past a crowd and everyone's cheering for you. And, my experience at the front of the crowd, was just, the police motorcade and the pace car, and then it was just me, and I had a pretty big gap over the rest of the field. So, I felt, it was a pretty incredible feeling having everyone cheering for you, whether they knew you or not. Everyone was getting behind you, and they wanted to see you do well. So that was really exciting, and definitely helped me push through some of those more difficult miles. So if you were on the course, especially during that part, thank you so much. I'm not quite sure that you understand the amount of the impact that it had, and allowed me to continue to run fast through a very difficult part of the race. But then heading around, so I made it to the turnaround point, and you're really going from running north to running southeast at that point. So what was a headwind was now a tailwind, and I knew at that point I had 4 miles to go, so it was mile 22, and at this point it was holding on. I was like, okay, at this point I can push a little bit harder, I will start to run faster, and I just want to maintain that lead and just take it 1 mile at a time. And at this point, I just started to really think back on all the training that I've done, all the workouts and the long miles, the sacrifices I made. I found a lot of, I think just a lot of confidence knowing that I'd done the work and that I could push hard and that my body was going to be able to handle it. So, that also just gave me a lot of encouragement to continue going, to continue fighting through that part of the race. This was also a really interesting part of the race because it's where the marathon and the half marathon come together. So, I was running past the half marathon runners, and everyone was cheering me on, and it was just a really fun atmosphere. I definitely heard my name a few times, saw a few people that I knew. I wasn't able to acknowledge everybody. I was trying to not. I wanted to conserve as much energy as I could. So if you were cheering for me again, thanks. I did hear you, or at least most likely I heard you, but was still trying to stay as focused as I could and finish strong. But yeah, so I was able to push pretty hard. About 2 miles out, I think right around mile 24 is when I did feel my legs start to get heavy. Up until that point, actually, my legs felt really strong. My heart rate was under control. My heart rate didn't really go up anymore, but I could just feel, I was out there running I ran 24 miles, so it was completely normal at this point for my legs to be tired, and that's exactly what I felt. So, I just remind myself that I already did the work for 24 miles. It was 2 more. I've ran 2 miles a lot of times over this training block, and that I could push hard, and any temporary discomfort, any pain would pale in comparison to what it would feel like to be able to finish strong, knowing that I worked as hard as I could, regardless of the outcome. And that's exactly what I did. So I just continued to drive, push hard, and maintain the pace, right on pace, all the way through. So, I was making my way back through downtown Richmond. Crowds were getting bigger and louder. There's just so much excitement on the course at that point from me, but also for all the people running the half marathon. It was a really fun and really just electric environment. But I made that last right turn, heading downtown, leaving kind of downtown into Browns Island, and if you've ran Richmond, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where there's this really steep downhill. And at that point, I just opened up my stride, and the whole street was lined with people cheering, everyone finishing, everyone coming down there, approaching the finish line. And it was at that point that I realized that I was going to win. And I tried not to think about it. I had some thoughts earlier on in the race that I was going to do it, that I was going to not only podium but finish in first place. And I just pushed those out of my mind immediately. I didn't want to get complacent. I had no idea, if there was someone behind me or someone that was running faster. Or if someone could catch up to me, or if I would at any point start to fall off. So I didn't want to start thinking about it, but when I got around that last turn, everything started to become, real and tangible. I could see the finish line, and I knew I was going to be able to break the tape, and I was just flooded with emotions. I was just so incredibly proud to know that I worked so hard and that it was all materializing. It all came together just at the right time, at the right moment on race day. And that's really all I could hope for. So, I saw the time, I knew I wasn't gonna break 2:25, and I couldn't care less at that moment. I raised up my hands, crossed the finish line, breaking the tape, and I felt like I just was on top of the world. It was incredible. Right after the race, I did an interview, a TV interview with 12 on Your Side, and then afterwards caught up with the second place finisher, who's someone I connected with, Jonathan Coleman on Strava. Follow his Strava. He does some great workouts, and he broke sub 2:30 for the first time and had just a phenomenal race. And it was really great to connect with him and just talk a little bit about the race itself and life. Another really strong runner, Brian Clapp, who I also connected with on Strava. He came out and ran, I believe, it was a 2:31, finishing, I think it was maybe 4th or 5th, but had just a phenomenal race. And it's another example of someone who works really hard. He was planning on running the Marine Corps Marathon a couple weeks ago, got sick, and then audibled last second, turned around, got healthy and ran Richmond and ran a phenomenal time. There's just so many stories, right? These are the few people that I talked to right after the race, but everyone that crossed the finish line that day, regardless of what the distance was, whether it was the marathon, the half, the 8K. I just have so much respect for anyone that took on such an intimidating challenge, right? That put the work in, sacrificed, and then worked really hard the day of to be able to cross that finish line. So, it's one of the great things I love about running itself. It's this personal journey where you're running for something different, but on the day of, everyone is so incredibly supportive. And everyone, whether you are running or whether you're cheering, everyone wants to see you do your best. And that just environment is incredible. I was so happy to be part of that. And I love being able to get the win, and run well, but also bring the crown to Richmond. It was great to be able to win my hometown race, and that was really exciting. And again, just full circle moment from running my first marathon to be able to win the race. I spent a little time afterwards. I caught up with my fiance, who also ran. She ran the half marathon and PR'd as well and had a great race. So we definitely spent some time just walking around downtown on Browns Island and just enjoying the moment. And then afterwards we went back, got cleaned up, and then went to our kind of annual post-Richmond race lunch spot, which is Lily Pearl, and I had a fried chicken sandwich with fries and macaroni and cheese. Just a really indulgent Southern meal. It's absolutely incredible. It's the same meal I've had the last 2 years, and as long as I'm running Richmond, I think that will be a staple. Maybe I have to make it back there a little bit more often. That was a really good meal. If you're still watching, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to my recap. Hopefully you found some of the information interesting, informative. If nothing else, that you feel maybe motivated or inspired to do great things, whether that is run a marathon, run a race, or just do something that you've always wanted to do. That would make me incredibly happy, knowing that I was able to help motivate someone reach a goal. So anyway, I'll stop talking. I'll leave it there. I'll make another video recapping some of my recovery, what I'm doing to get my body ready for the next race, and also just to recover it and feel good again. So stay tuned, and thanks again for watching.